Good morning, children. Welcome to the first class of social science. I extend a very warm welcome to all of you. So we will be starting with social science. Within social science, we will be starting with history first. Now, just to give a small recap, a small introduction on what this chapter in the year holds. So the chapter is medieval India, right? And in fact, this whole book, children, it is based on medieval India, right? So previous year you read about ancient India. This year we will start with and focus on medieval India, right? um, so all right, now children, history, specifically the Indian history, is divided into three parts: ancient, medieval, and modern. Now, the period before the 8th century, children, is known as the period of ancient India, right? Period before 8th century is known as period of ancient India. Now, the medieval period, children, is the period between 8th to 18th century, roughly 1,000 years. The period between 8th to 18th century is known as period of medieval Indian history. And the modern Indian history, children, comes after the 18th century. So once again, period before 8th century is the ancient history, period between 8th to 18th is the medieval history, and period after the 18th century is referred to as the modern history, right? Now, ancient we've already covered in the previous class. Medieval, children. Now, as you can clearly see, it is located in the middle as well, right? But this, children, I want to tell you something, that this division is not on the basis of days, right? It is not known as middle because it is like halfway between the dates of history. No, it is known as medieval, children, because there are a lot of there was during this period, when this period started until the period ended, there was a different kind of political there was a different kind of political and economic environment in the subcontinent, in terms of ideas, faiths, beliefs, and so on. For instance, children, religion. So there was old there were a lot there was a composite culture that emerged, in terms of, for example, what I mean by when I say a composite culture had emerged in the Indian subcontinent is that, so during the ancient Indian history, we see that we primarily had um, Hinduism and Buddhism in the subcontinent, right? But in the medieval history, right, we see rise of Islam, Christianity, Sikhism in the subcontinent. Yes. So this gave a very composite culture, right, to this particular phase in history. Another very interesting feature of this period is the rise of Bhakti Sufi movements. Children, have you heard of Mirabai? Yeah, she was a Christian Bhakt. Yes, she comes from, all her legends, all her stories that you hear comes from this particular time in history. Also, Sufism. Have you heard of any Sufi songs? I mean, I don't know, if you haven't, just Google them and listen to a couple of songs. Now, the birth of these songs, this movement of devotion towards God, right, again was born in this particular phase of history. Then what other things that you have is, children, right, the influence of foreign cultures, foreign invaders, right? So you have the Mughals coming in, you have the Delhi Sultanate, right? So all of these people who invaded India and who came into the subcontinent, right, they were foreigners. So you have a lot of foreign influence in terms of culture, in terms of rulers, right? A lot of people coming in into the Indian subcontinent, right? Now, children, another very important feature is that for ancient Indian history, we do not have as many sources as we have for medieval Indian history, right? You have a lot of sources in terms of monuments and archaeological sources, as well as literary sources. We will be covering this in the chapter ahead, but yeah. Okay. So, and modern history, children, modern Indian history is basically the British rule and the independence movement, right? All of that comes under the modern Indian history, right? Okay. So now, children, this medieval period is further divided into two parts. Okay. It is the early medieval period as well as the later medieval period, right? So when I say early medieval period, what I'm referring to is the period between 8th to 13th century, and to be precise, between 700 to 1200 common era, right? So this period of history, children, is known as the early medieval period, and it saw rulers of Palas, rulers as well as empires of Palas, Cholas, Rashtrakutas, Pratiharas, and Rajputs ruling the subcontinent, right? So these people came during the early medieval period. In the later medieval period, children, that's the period between 13th to 18th century, right? 13th to 18th century is known as the later medieval period, and this lies between the year 1200 to 1750 CE. Yes, and so during this period, what we see is Turks, Afghans, Mughals ruling the subcontinent. Right? So this shows the division into two parts. I will repeat again: early medieval period and later medieval period. So the 1,000 years have been divided into half, roughly, not exactly, but roughly half, between 700 to 1200 and between 1200 to 1750. Right? Um, Next, children, what we have is that how do historians get an understanding of this period of medieval history, right? So we have archaeological sources as well as literary sources. Now, within archaeological sources, now children, firstly, what is archaeological sources? Archaeological sources are basically those sources for which we have hard evidence, right? When I say hard evidence, what I mean is monuments, inscriptions, coins. They are hard, solid evidence, right? We have them. There is a physical existence. Yes. So these are archaeological sources. You have sculptures, you have cave paintings, you have monuments, inscriptions, coins, right? And then you also have a lot of literary sources. We will be covering them in the later slides. But first, we will cover archaeological sources in detail. Now, monuments. Children, what are monuments? Monuments are they are buildings, they are ruins of buildings, mosques, temples. You have what else? You have stupas, right? So all of these come under monuments, and they give very interesting insights. Children, they give interesting insight into the vision and the interest of the rulers, the culture, the strengths of that phase in history, right? So what I mean by these things is, so for example, when historians, they look at monument, right? So they see what kind of material, what kind of stone, or what kind of materials were used to make that particular monument. Then they try to understand that, okay, so what kind of architecture have they used, right? So for example, tombs, right? So the tombs and minarets that are there in a lot of monuments, children, you have to understand that that is not a phase wherein you had cranes, right? And those are heavy tombs. Yeah. So how did they place those tombs on top of the monuments? And you see beautiful tombs there. Like in most of the monuments, you find beautiful tombs. What kind of techniques did they use to lift that tomb up? Yeah, because it is heavy metal. So we get very interesting insights into, just by looking a monument, what kind of rooms are there, what was the purpose, right? Then what kind of architecture and everything that flows, right? So you get a lot of interesting information. Also for the medieval history, in fact, Delhi itself has a lot of um, monuments. You have the Humayun's tomb, Red Fort, right? If you guys have not visited these monuments after the quarantine is over, do go and visit these places. they offer very interesting insights into this particular phase of history, right? Okay, so next what we have is, children, we have inscriptions. Now, what are inscriptions? Inscriptions are, so basically inscriptions are written evidences on solid surfaces. When I say solid surfaces, I mean pillars, on pillars, on walls of palaces and monuments, on rocks, right? So all of those, so we have found a lot of inscriptions engraved on various surfaces, right, across the subcontinent. Yes, and so the definition would be, they are religious instructions or records of royal proclamations and gifts to temples and villages, right? They have given us a varied amount of information on the military interests, the achievements, the wars, victories, and social and spiritual messages that the rulers have often wanted to bring across to the public. Yes. Now, for example, children, say there's a ruler, right? And he wants to tell his people what his rules are. So how would he go about it? Yes. So this is not a period in history wherein you had television or radio to stream what you wanted to bring across. So what you would do, they would engrave their rulings on stones or pillars and rocks, right? So that people can see and understand what the ruler wants to say, right? So that's how inscriptions give us very interesting insights. Next, what we have for archaeological sources is coins. Now, children, I forgot to mention, the study of inscriptions is known as epigraphy, right? And the person who studies these inscriptions is known as an epigrapher or an epigraphist. Now, similarly, children, for coins, the study of coins is known as numismatics. And the person who studies these coins is known as a numismatist, right? Now, coins, children, again, give very interesting insights into the extent of the empire, the names and ruling periods of the kings, the economy of the kingdom. When I say extent of the empire, what I mean, children, is that, for example, you found a coin belonging to the Tughlaqs, right, somewhere in Haryana. The same coin you find in UP. So it is safe to draw a conclusion, right, that that Tughlaqs ruled from Haryana till UP, right? So this is how scholars get an insight into the extent of the empire. Similarly, coins have a lot of engravings on them. They tell us about the name of the ruler or the year they were printed, right? Similarly, the economy of the kingdom. Now, when I use the word economy, children, what I mean is the richness of the kingdom, right? Now, you would be wondering, how can we tell if a kingdom is rich or not just by looking at coins? Yeah. So, children, the answer is that what kind of metal or material is the coin made of, right? What kind of alloy is used? Is it copper? Is it gold? Is it silver, right? Is it metal? It tells us how rich the kingdom was, okay? So coins, once again, children, offer very interesting insights to historians and archaeologists. So through this we cover the archaeological sources. Now we'll move on to the literary sources, children. So what kind of literary sources do we have? So literary sources, children, firstly, is any evidence that is written in nature is a literary source, right? So writing evidences, we have chronicles, we have farmans, official notices, royal letters, autobiographies, biographies, travelogues, right? We have a variety of literature, right, to understand and study this period of history. Children, I want to bring this across, that although paper was invented after the 13th century, yeah, so it is only after the 13th century that we find evidences on paper, written evidences on paper. But before that, we have other ways of written evidences. You have things written on stone tablets, palm leaves, and so on. Yes, so those things were used to write and pass on messages. Okay, so now we will take up literary sources one by one. Travelogues. Now, as the name suggests, these are accounts written by travelers. Travelogues, accounts written by travelers. So these are first-hand accounts of observations and meetings by travelers. So what they observed when they traveled into the subcontinent, what kind of meetings they had with the ordinary people as well as the kings. Yeah. So some of the most famous ones are Al-Biruni. So Al-Biruni came to India from Central Asia, and he wrote his book Tariq al-Hind. Similarly, next you have Ibn Battuta. I hope this name rings a bell. If it doesn't, there's a very popular Bollywood song on this as well. But let me tell you, there is no correlation between the song and this man. But yes, he was there and based in Old Delhi. He visited Old Delhi. And so yeah, so his accounts give very interesting insights. His book is known as Rihala, and he came during the Tughlaqs, and he came from Morocco, right? So next what you have, children, is Abdul Razak. Abdul Razak came to the kingdom of Vijayanagar, present dates in and around Andhra Pradesh. Again, very interesting insights. His travelogue gives us a lot of interesting information. And then we have had a lot of other travelers as well, from Russia, from Europe. So from Europe you have Marco Polo, from Venice, Bernier, Tavernier, Duarto Barbosa, and many more others as well who came from Europe, right? So travelogues is they're very interesting details that you get. Next, what you have is, children, chronicles. Now, chronicles, as the name suggests, comes from the word chronology. Now, when I say chronology, what I mean is events in order of which they happened, right? So, you might have heard the word chronological order, right? So, it records the events in order of which they happened. And these are very detailed accounts of the times and lives of the kings, and mostly we find these chronicles in Persian and Turkish. Now, for the medieval Indian history, we have found Raja Tarangini, written by Kalhana. Then you have King. So Raja Tarangini is basically talks about the kings of Kashmir. Then we have Tariq-e-Feroz Shahi by Ziauddin Barani, and he wrote about sultans of Delhi till the time period of Firoz Shah Tughlaq. Then you have Tariq-e-Farishta written by Farishta, and he wrote about Delhi sultans from Turks till 17th century. Then you also have Khazanul Futu as well as Tughlaq-Anama, written by Amir Khusro, and he was there during the time period of Khiljis and Tughlaq, so his account extensively talks about the reign of Khiljis and Tughlaqs. Right? These offer very interesting details of what happened, when did the war happen, and what kind of, which area was covered, whether there was victory or there was defeat, what was the conclusion, right? Who was born when, who married whom. So all of these orders in chronology, it's like a timeline. Okay, so chronicles offer very interesting insights. Next, what you have is autobiography. Now, children, I hope you know what an autobiography is, just in case you don't. So autobiography is the story of a person's life that he or she writes himself or herself, right? So so autobiography is a biography that you write on your own. Okay, so you have Babur wrote his own biography known as Baburnama. Then Jahangir wrote, excuse me, Jahangir wrote his own biography known as Tuzuk-e-Jahangiri. Then you have Futuhat-e-Firoz by Firoz Shah Tughlaq, right? You also have a lot of biographies for the medieval period. You have, so again, biography is the story of a person's life written by someone else. So mostly it's the court poet or someone who is commissioned by the ruler to write on his or her life story. So you have Prithviraj Raso, is the name of is the biography is the name of the biography of Prithviraj Chauhan. It was written by Chand Bardai. Then you have Humayun Nama, written by Gulab Dan Begum, and he talked about Emperor Humayun. Akbarnama by Abul Fazl. This is very important and a very interesting source. And there are a lot of volumes from which we get to know about the Akbar's time. You have Tariq-e-Sher Shahi by Abbas Sherwani, written on the life of Sher Shah Suri. Right. Um, that this ends the chapter, children. But just to give a small recap, we covered the different periods of Indian history: ancient, medieval, and modern. Then we covered the bifurcation of medieval period. Then we understood the sources of understanding this period, the medieval period of history. Within which we covered the archaeological sources as well as the literary sources. Within the archaeological sources, you had um, you had monuments, inscriptions, and coins. And within the literary sources, you had chronicles, travelogues, autobiographies, and biographies, which we studied in detail. Yes. So I thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I enjoyed presenting it to you, and you've understood. If you've not, please come back to me with doubts. I would appreciate as many doubts as you can come up with. Thank you so much. Hope you have a nice day.